Ocean with the League, and he thinks he's going to change the terms of the trade, which would be a good thing if you know the kind of seedy stuff they're trading in. In actual fact, the League have very different ideas about what's going on and what's going to happen. This is from the standpoint of Sire Neen. He's one of these Leaguemen who doesn't much like the Akarans, which is clear in this scene. Oh, and also, it's kind of coincidental, and I'm not trying to nose in on Jeff's territory, but the ship they're in is called the Ambergris. Sire Neen took a perverse pleasure in recalling all the things he knew about the world that the Akarans did not. It was too long a list for him to go through in one sitting, but he often tried. It soothed him. Their ignorance was as much a balm to him as the mist was. It's a drug. As he sat in the plush banquet room of the Ambergris, the massive ship they had switched to at the Outer Isles, the thought of lecturing Corin, Queen Corin, slicked the League man's hands with sweat and stiffened him with pent-up desire. He hated her, and he wished her to know it in her final moments, when she gave everything to the League and they destroyed her. If she'd accepted the League's offer to meet the Lothan Auckland herself, he would be beside himself with expectation, luxuriating in the surprise he was about to present her with. Having to settle for Dariel instead was some compensation, and he would do his best to relish what awaited them. "So, we are halfway to the other lands," he said, lifting his voice so that it carried through the noise of conversation and dining. "What do you make of the trip so far, Your Highness?" Dariel, sitting across the round table from him, crooked a grin and spoke to the gathered company of Leaguemen, naval officers, imperial officials, and concubines. "I'll admit to being impressed," he said. He played with his food for a moment, absently pushing uneaten morsels around with the point of his knife. The range was like nothing I'd ever imagined. To think the League has sailed through all that, all these years. "It is nothing," Sire Neen said. "Nothing for us, at least, we who truly know the sea." The prince showed no sign. He caught the insult. He shook his head in childlike wonder. And those creatures today, just bizarre. I'll dream of them tonight, I'm sure. So there had been a couple of moments when the prince's naive composure had been rattled. Both had been pleasant to witness for Neen and were a comfort for him to remember. When they had first sailed out onto the wave peaks of the range had been one such moment. In truth, the sight still amazed the Leagueman, even though he had witnessed it scores of times. They were not sure what caused them, but the captains believed that some change in the features far below the surface of the water affected the currents above. 9 days out from the Outer Isles, sailing due west with good winds, the Ambergris, massive as it was to human eyes, had been but a cork bobbing on a gray-black, fathomless ocean. They had been days riding swells of 30 and 40 feet, but at that unmarked boundary, all that had changed. Far below, the bottom dropped, or rose, or undulated for all they knew. Whatever caused it, the result of the surface was that the swells rose into peaks, sheer reaches hundreds of feet high. Riding up them was like grinding over stone, slow and painful. The hull of the ship trembled with the effort, and each time Neen had a momentary fear that the boat would slip backward. It never did, though. The heavy bosom of the Ambergris thrust far out into the air, spray whipping around those on board like a creature's intent on ripping them from the deck. And as the ship tilted onto the slope, the descent switched into a mad acceleration, reaching speeds beyond any seen on land. The Ambergris became a careening leviathan at the edge of control, moving so fast the water around them hissed, as if being scorched by the hulls passing. They plunged down until the prow dug into the base of the next wave, submerging the four portions of the deck for several long moments before slowly rising again. Then it began all over again. Sire Neen went on deck only briefly as they entered the range. He had the pleasure of seeing the expression of awe on Dariel's face as he looked at the seething immensity of giants rolling toward them, rank after rank for as far as the eye could see. Yes, that was a pleasure, Neen thought, still chewing the same mouthful of meat, the dinner conversation revolving around him. He heard it, took in most of what was being said at some level, but the focus of his mist-enhanced mind moved elsewhere freely. Today was a pleasure as well. How close, Prince. How close you came to being tipped into the mouths of devils. If only you knew. They had come out of the range the day before. The sea had returned to its normal swells. The waves remained high by most standards, and many gathered on the deck to marvel at the relative calm of the ocean compared to what they had just passed through. The ambergris once more plowed its somewhat serene course. The Leagueman had expected the creatures to appear that day, but the moment of their arrival was so sudden it snatched his breath away. He had been standing beside Ryalis when the lookouts shouted from the crow's nest. The character of the ocean all around them changed in an instant. As far as the eye could see in any direction, the water churned and writhed. Hundreds of large creatures broke the surface, swimming at speed through the waves like dolphins. But these were not dolphins. Are they? Dariel's voice came from behind them, wavering and thin. The prince reached the railing and grasped it. Cyrene glanced over at him. Yes, he said. Sea wolves. Not truly a fitting name. They're not like wolves at all. They're like nothing really, except themselves. When he looked back, the creatures were all around the ship. They rose from the depths, quickly taking shape behind the liquid glass of the green water. Their heads were great knotted bulbs of waxy-looking pink flesh, barnacled and gashed and grimed by sea slime. It was hard to gauge their size from the deck. Even from that height, it was clear they were larger than any of the whales seen in the waters around the known world, or even out to the Boomo archipelago. But they were not whales either. They swam with the combined action of flippers that lined their long bodies and inhaling and exhaling propulsion of water. They swelled and deflated, rose and fell, so close together that it was hard to tell where each individual began and ended. The sea wolves drew tighter in around the brig, so turning the water that it seemed the ambergris plowed through a sea just of the creatures. They jockeyed for position along the massive wall of the hull. They caressed it, bumped it, tried to slide up out of the water as if they would climb it. They slapped at it with tentacled arms that peeled away from their bodies and moved with a fluid rhythm. They clearly wished to gain some purchase on the hull, but they could not do so. They slid off the slick white coating. Some propelled themselves up out of the water, slammed the hull with the weight of their bodies. These just dropped back into the froth, frustrated. One creature, marked from the rest by an enormous barnacle protrusion on its head, squirmed in the water just beneath them, keeping pace. It rolled to the side and for a moment seemed to study them with one enormous yellow eye. The pupil contracted, perhaps from the light of the bright sky, but to Cyrene it seemed the beast was focusing his attention on him, picking him out from the many gaping faces looking over the rail. The Leagueman had the sudden urge to grab the prince and toss him over, right toward that eye and waiting mouth. It was a fantasy urge, for he had no physical strength to match Dariel's, but it came to him so strongly he tasted metal on his tongue. But the moment passed. The creature rolled away and vanished. Cyrene opened his eyes again, realizing that his name had been called, pulling him back from his reverie. Dariel watched him from across the table, a look of amused curiosity on his face. "I'm sorry," Cyrene said. "What was it you asked?" Dariel said, "I asked if there were any more surprises in store for me, sire." The Leagueman held back the impulse to run his tongue over the rounded nubs of his teeth. He held the prince's gaze with a smiling visage, while several others offered wry remarks. "Would it surprise you," he thought, "to know that I wake every morning imagining your downfall? Would it surprise you to know that I'm not going to make amends with the Lothan Auckland? Instead, I will destroy them. Would it surprise you to know that you are to be offered up as a gesture of good faith to a people who will eat your soul, as a slave, a toy, a plaything for monsters? Would it surprise you to know that once the Lothan Auckland are gone, there will be no greater power in the world than the League? And would it surprise you if I said right now, prepare your knees for bending, Prince, prepare your knees?" Eventually the others quieted and it fell to Cyrene to actually answer. He said, "Oh, certainly. If there's one thing I can promise you with certainty, Your Highness, it's that surprises await you."